So, with all that said, I want to talk a little bit today about some date calcs and how we can think through this. Especially, I usually give this type of presentation late in the year in December, and you'll see the reason why in just a moment. But it was something that was a frustration for me, a frustration for some of the staff that I worked with at times. And I just want to make sure, I want to go ahead and drop something in the chat if I may. And so that you don't have to just, take notes or anything like that. All this is already on Tableau Public. So just sit back, have a good time. Don't worry about the calculations. You can come back to it a little bit later. So a little bit about me. As mentioned, I was ATUG leader, but most importantly, I was one of the first 30. And you can see this picture here, a much thinner version of myself, way back in 2009, when we started this community, and it was a lot of fun. I was addicted to it. I absolutely loved Tableau. And went from working from a small municipal, which was about a $50 million a year municipal, to a much larger company called Oldcastle, which was a $2.5 billion company. Still not a huge company, but to put that in perspective, they were generating revenue in the tune of $50 million a day, where I had been used to using or having with a company that only was $50 million a year. Here's my wife Jennifer. Our family way back when you could still get out, and hopefully COVID subsides this spring, and we will have an opportunity to have a lot of these meetings in face to face. This is me. That you can see here's Andy Piper, who was one of the original 4 TUG leaders. We're speaking here at a conference, and you might know that gentleman as the very first CEO of Tableau, Christian Chabot. So a long history. Absolutely love the product. Absolutely love the people that I work with. I also should mention that we have another Tableau customer success manager that's on the line or on this call as well, Vanessa Joyce. She is a colleague of mine, and she too is just kind of tuning in, getting ideas from ATUG, because in my view, it's probably the best. It's the first and the best TUG. It's always entertaining, and I always learn something new. So I do want to mention what you are about to see here are true stories. A lot of it is airing dirty laundry. I do blur out people's names to protect the innocent, so that nobody comes back to me and says, "Hey, I saw that you're using one of my screenshots." But it is all true, and I just want to kind of set, level set that. So about the data. So I'm connecting to a little data set that I've created, just to show you that there's no foolery or anything. It's about 2.2 million rows, not very large by any extent, but I did want to kind of level set that. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the data source. I am using a kind of a version of Superstore data that I've trimmed down. However, I've connected it to a fiscal calendar. And what I want to mention is that there are multitudes of fiscal calendars. Some people start their fiscal year in February. I have a couple of customers that start kind of mid-year. But I wanted to go with something that was a little bit more complex. And this fiscal calendar is about the most complex that I am aware of. And it's used a lot in manufacturing. It's called a 445 calendar. And it is used in manufacturing because you can then take any week in the current year and fiscal year and look backwards and see relatively approximate the same week in time. So manufacturers love it. And what is a 445? Basically, and it's important because in retail and in manufacturing, you see this quite frequently. So if you're looking for a potential position, if you have some working knowledge of a 445, that's something to speak to. A fiscal calendar still consists of, or a fiscal quarter still consists of 3 months. So that's nothing changed there. However, what is a little wonky is that you have a 4 week, 4 week, 5 week, and then it starts over again, 4 week, 4 week, 5 week. And so that is the significance of a 445. That we build them together. So you might be in February, but actually be in a January fiscal month, or a first month of the year. Ours was a little bit more complex. I came from a company called Oldcastle. Each week had 5 days. So once again, a 445 week or month, but each week had 5 days. So how did we basically determine what Saturday and Sunday, if we had any sales? Saturday actually rolled back into Friday, and Sunday sales actually rolled into Monday. So that was our month, and that is what this calendar, this fiscal calendar does, that I replicated. And so if you have a calendar of that complexity, typically then you're going to need some type of table that tells the system, that tells your data, all right, although we are, January 20th, 2022, what does that equate to the fiscal calendar? And you can see it's very, very simple. It's just a real easy table that I've linked by just the date, by the actual calendar date, and then the calendar date is joined so that it equates to what week I'm in, what month I'm in, and where I am within the fiscal calendar. That is how most of the companies that I work with as a customer success manager, that's how they deal with that. If it's something more simple, with simply moving a month forward, then they might use a much simpler way of creating that connection. But because this was complex, we needed that side table per se to know what day, what calendar day was, and what the fiscal calendar was. So that is a little bit about the little bit of background. I'm going to open up with a question. And I don't have the chat open, so maybe Nathan or whomever's monitoring chat can just make, kind of see what the audience thinks. But my question is, what's wrong with these calculations? Now, this is from a previous presentation that I did, so I don't have 2022 in there, but let's just pretend for the moment that we're in the latter part of 2021. You can see fiscal revenue prior year is fiscal year is 2020, then revenue, and then this is the current year calculation. If fiscal year equals 2021, then revenue. So basically 2 different calculations. One is calculating for the current year. The other one is calculating for the prior year. Anybody see any potential issues with that?
So Brian says requires you to update both calcs when the year changes over.
Oh my God, yes, we have a winner. I tell you what, if we can, and that was relatively quick. If we can get his email address, I will one-up you and offer him a $50 gift certificate to the Tableau store, because that is exactly what happens. Is that, and this is the problem. You come back and literally, this is a live screen that or a photo of a live screen. From one analyst, I think it was way back in 2016. I was, long before the word COE was created, I was in essence in charge of double checking everyone's visualizations before they were published, to make sure they adhered to best practices, from a speed and performance perspective, from a branding and visualization perspective. And so I came back after the holidays one year, and this gentleman had to go back and modify 15 visualizations that had used static years to calculate current year and prior year. Not fun at all. What's even worse was that I had a couple of members that overlooked some visualizations that they had. And so those static calculations went unnoticed for almost into July. So you have to then monitor, each workbook. You have to remember which workbook is using those static calculations. Not fun, not something that you look forward to at the turn of the year, that you then have to come back and think through. I've got to change all of these workbooks, which is a manual process, and then I've got to republish. So that is not the way to do it. So how can we compensate for that? And I'm going to show you some of the things that I did, and sometimes I'll be honest with you, this was in the days long before level of detail calculations. Level of detail calculations made this so much easier. I'm going to show you how we compensated for that. Before I begin, I'm kind of passionate. You'll see that I'm passionate about calculations, but I'm also probably more passionate about the speed of your calculations. And I want you to think every time, whether you're connecting to a data set that's got 20, 50 rows or has 20 or 50 million rows of data, you always want to think about performance. And what I want to stress is if you use Tableau well and are using Tableau, especially date calculations, in the way that you would use numeric calculations, that is going to be much faster than using Tableau with string calculations. Because when you're using string calculations, or when you're filtering string fields, it is a byte by byte comparison, and there's no way to do that fast. That's not a Tableau issue. That's just a computer issue. It's a processing issue. However, when you're comparing dates to other dates or using integer values, they run much quicker because they are comparing on a bit level basis. Boolean is the fastest. So you're going to see I create a lot of calculations in that way. So let's move on. Let's get into the nitty gritty of this. Once again, make use of the public. Don't feel as though you have to watch this and write anything down. So the first thing I want to show you is the way that we used a current year calculation. And basically, it was a Boolean that said is current year. And how did we do this? Well, our database was updated every morning for the previous day. So there were no future dates. If you had future dates, you'd have to compensate for that. But we knew that the data that once it was refreshed was always going to be as of yesterday. Now, in some instances, yesterday, if it was a Sunday, we may not have had any sales on a Sunday. So what this does is tells us what is the current year based on the fixed maximum fiscal year within the data set. And the reason that this is important is this level of detail calculation, because where people get tripped up is they try to just do a max on the data itself. And what happens is then they enact a filter, or they enable a filter, and all of a sudden that max changes based on what they filtered. As we all know, unless you're using a data source filter, this is going to work before your quick filters are enabled. So this is saying, is current year, is the fiscal year the maximum within the data set? We do the same thing with prior year, because once you have, that's always a start. That's always my start. And so From that, if I have my current year, I can go in and do the same thing with previous years. So normally we did year over year comparisons. This is going to work even if you're doing a 3-year or 5-year comparison. You're just getting the top 5. You're just programmatically checking to see what is my max date, knowing that the max date is always going to be updated through yesterday in our case, and this will get you the right value. So what I have then, based on those two, is I can then create current revenue. And all I say is, now that I have my Boolean, I said, if it's current year, then revenue. If it's previous year, then I'm going to get the revenue. So I love this because this always drives people. I'm just gonna do this real quick. Bam. And I'm gonna reverse the order. So this now shows me the revenue for prior year and the current year revenue. This always sets salesmen. When I first showed them this, and we were one of the very first, probably back in 2014, long before the word explorer or creator, we were using web authoring. So one of my jobs was, once I curated a data set, I went around the country training salesmen, production, on how to use Tableau Web Authoring. And the salesmen really went up in arms when you first showed them this viz, because obviously they were very proud of where they would be at any point in the year. This is, of course, showing a full year of 2021, and only we're in the first 20 days of 2022. And so this is really not a good comparison. And they would be the first ones in the audience that stand up and go, wait a minute, there's something wrong there. And absolutely there is. So what about year to date and prior year? Once again, I create 2 Booleans that handle it. I did this a little bit differently, and I'm going to show you why in just a moment. And the first thing I need to know is, if I'm going to just show you the data. So I'm going to first pull in the invoice date. Just give me a moment to do this. And then I'm going to show you the fiscal date, just to show you how this all kind of plays out. Here, there. And I'll go down to the bottom and we'll talk a little bit about what we've seen here. So the way that this 445 plays out, though, is even though today or yesterday was January 19th, it was the 3rd day or the 13th day of the first month in our fiscal year. So I just want to kind of level set that as to, where we are in the fiscal year. And to be honest, we never really spoke to calendar dates. We always spoke to fiscal dates. We always wanted to know where we were in fiscal January per se. We didn't care that, and you can see here that January, the invoice date actually started here on January 2nd. We just cared about the fiscal date. So with that said, what dates are considered year to date? Well, obviously, I need to know anything that is month, day in the current year. Anything that is above that, for instance, obviously, if I go back here to January of 2021, you'll see that I only care, if I'm looking at year over year comparisons, I would only care about going to the 13th day of the fiscal month. So how do we do that? Well, I create an is fiscal year to date calculation. And this is a little bit wonky when you first look at it, but it makes perfect sense. Basically, I'm taking, and I'm doing this all on an integer math basis so that I am able to compare not dates, but I'm actually able to compare integer values, which is even going to run faster. I take my fiscal month and I multiply it by 100. What that does is, for instance, if it's, and I'll just tack on here, if it's January, I don't want 120, okay, or in this case 113, which is the fiscal month and day, because when I compare that to say 1213, it's not going to show correctly. I actually need to compare 0113 time, or 0113 to another entry, to another month, day. And the way that I do that is I just multiply it by 100. I then tack on the fiscal day, and I make sure that that is less than or equal to what I am considered to be the last, the greatest date, which was once again the fiscal date maximum and the fiscal date maximum day. So let's see how that all works out. If I pull in just is fiscal year to date, I'm just going to pull that in here. You can see now that going down here, I have a flag that tells me, all right, from 1/1, this is fiscal date speaking, from January 1st, 2022, all the way to 1/13, which is a fiscal date, are in my year to date fiscal period. That is true. If I go all the way back up to 2021, you can see once again here the same thing, all the way from fiscal date January 1st, 2021, all the way down to fiscal January 13th day in January is set to true. If I go back even farther on 2020, because I'm only now comparing month and day, it's going to work going backwards all the way really to the beginning of time, or in this case, to the beginning of my data set. Why is that important? Because sometimes I don't care just about year over year. Sometimes I want to see this year compared to last year, compared to the year prior, or even farther back in time. So let's do that. I'm going to take and I'm going to bring in revenue. I'm going to bring in fiscal date. Okay, I am going to change the marks here just to be a little bit better, to bars. And now, once again, this is where the salesman would say, well, wait a minute, that's an unfair comparison. I want to see, I want to see where I am in this point in time compared to where I was the same point in time last year. I just pull that into filters, set it to true, hit OK. And now I can see in 2022, I'm rocking and rolling. I'm looking real good in the first 13 days of the fiscal month. So that's number one. Number two, and I have to preface this. When I asked this question, this was before we had some functionality in Tableau, because some of these calculations go back a pretty good period of time, and so what we did to make this work, it worked in the time, but it was not something that we were very proud of going forward. And let me make this a little bit bigger. Can anybody tell me, just by looking at that beast, what that calculation might be doing? And once again, Nathan, if you can let me know in chat. It took us a while to develop this too. Okay, this might have people stumped, except maybe the Zen masters that are on. So the one thing that I suggest when I have a string of a date add calculation like this, I kind of work, I kind of read it from right to left instead of from left to right. And basically it's saying, give me the today's date, give me the date part of that day, of the weekday of today, subtract one, subtract that all by a minus, and give me the weekday. So basically, and this is a big this is a huge calculation
Well, we've
for,
got a couple guesses if you want to
oh, do
hear.
you? Okay, go before I hit it.
Okay, getting the previous day or time period, or
Close.
going
Yeah.
back 2 weekdays.
Okay. In that case, that's very, very close. Basically, what this is doing is always returning the last Sunday. And why is that important in the retail space? Because many people are looking at week over week, and they're not interested in really evaluating this week until their Saturday is done. And so this will always return the most recent Sunday. Let me pull that bad boy up. Now, this is not the way that I would do it now, but this is the way that we did it back in the day, back before the calculation came to be that I'm about to show you next. That is all to say is that you want to constantly review your calculations. I know sometimes it's real easy to say it works. It's not pretty, but it works. The problem with this is the readability is not that great. And granted, I should have probably at the time put a comment section up there. But from a readability standpoint, and so if somebody comes in behind you to try to figure out what's going on, it's going to be very, very difficult. But that was a very close guess. The best way now to do this, and this was long before we had such a beast, is just to simply use the date trunk. Basically, that date calculation, that long string that I originally had, was finding the first Sunday. And that was, I think, probably 2 or 3 years before we had the ability to use date trunk. Obviously, now, if somebody comes in and sees the simplicity of that, they can say, oh my gosh, yeah, why weren't you doing that before? Well, because we didn't have it available to us when we first started running that visualization. And you can see they're both identical, except obviously the date trunk makes it a whole lot easier. One of the things that I see often, and unfortunately, I say unfortunately, fortunately, we at Tableau have made great strides in essence, sometimes rewarding bad behavior. Because originally, I used to show this and do all kinds of performance recording, and you could see it. You could really see the difference in speed. You won't be able to see a difference in speed with the calculation I'm about to show you, unless you're running tens or hundreds of millions of rows of data. And that's the frustrating thing, is that you will have a dashboard that works well with 100,000, 200, 500,000 rows of data, and then you convert it to, you either productionalize it and you're pointing to a much larger data set, and you go, why all of a sudden is it so much slower than when I was pointing to just a smaller data set? And I see this, unfortunately, all the time. I'm just going to pull it out and you'll see it runs very, very fast. But this is not the way that I would recommend writing this calculation. Basically, and once again, you'll see this even still on this day on Tableau blogs, and it kind of makes me cringe. What this fiscal date calculation here is doing, let me get a little bit bigger so you can see, is it's taking the fiscal month, creating a string of the fiscal month, then appending a forward slash, and then another string of the date, and then another slash, and then the fiscal year. In other words, you're converting the entire portions, because the way that this data set is laid out is it shows you month, day, year. You convert it into a string, and then you use the date calculation to make that a true date. The problem with that is that's going to run very quick, probably up to 1 million rows, and maybe even a little bit beyond. But when you get into the hundreds of millions of rows, you are going to see an issue with that. I'm being told to watch my time. I want to do that. And in the essence of time, I want to give just one more hint as far as what I suggest with sales. Once again, all of this is on Tableau Public. It's on the link. But I wanted to just give you one other thought. I was in Washington, D.C. about to present. Someone says, hey, there's something wrong with this dashboard. Don't know what it is, but the numbers don't look right. And that's sure enough, I looked in the history. One of the updates to extract did not take place. You want to get in the habit of somewhere within the dashboard articulating what is this data showing me and through what date. So once again, I use that level of detail, max calculation, saying no matter how I have this potential dashboard filtered, it was last updated with data from 119, which is correct, the previous day, as an invoice date. And that answers a lot of questions. So I would encourage you to always have that either as a tooltip or actually put it in within the title. And of course, that's very easy to do by just within the title incorporating your invoice date, the maximum LOD calculation. So with that said, I think I'm pretty close to time. Is there any questions or is anything I can answer? Would love to have an opportunity to do so.